We all know the names that usually get brought up when people talk about rock legends. But there's another story underneath the headlines. A story where women weren't just featured singers or background players. They were quietly rewriting the rules of rock and soul from the inside. Tonight, we're going back to the 60s, 70s, and beyond, to look at 4 women whose voices, choices, and presence changed music in ways we still feel today. Ronnie Spector, Karen Carpenter, Aretha Franklin, Stevie Nicks. Different genres, different images, different eras. Same outcome. Rock and soul never sounded the same after they were done. Let's start where a lot of people underestimate the power. The so-called girl group era. And a voice that was way more dangerous than the industry wanted to admit. In the early 1960s, the girl group sound was supposed to be safe. Sweet harmonies, pretty faces, songs about crushes and heartbreak. But then there was Ronnie Spector. When Be My Baby hit the radio in 1963, the drums were huge. The production was massive, but it was her voice that cut through everything. It wasn't polite. It wasn't restrained. It sounded like longing, danger, and defiance all at once. Behind the scenes, the image was tightly controlled. The Ronettes were styled, posed, and packaged. But that voice refused to stay inside the box the industry built for it. Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys famously called Be My Baby the greatest pop record ever made. Bruce Springsteen would later build entire arrangements inspired by that sound. Future punk and rock singers heard Ronnie and realized you could be loud emotionally, even when you weren't screaming. In a time when girl groups were treated as disposable, Ronnie's vocal attitude became a blueprint. She brought a rock and roll edge into tightly managed pop, and that edge would echo through everything from 70s arena rock to 80s heartland rock. So when you hear that opening drum beat, you're not just hearing a hit single, you're hearing a woman forcing her way into the center of rock history, even if the credits didn't always say it out loud. Jump ahead into the 1970s, and rock was getting bigger, louder, more theatrical. Guitar solos were stretching, drums were booming, singers were belting to the rafters. And then, in the middle of all that, came Karen Carpenter. Her voice was the opposite of what big rock was supposed to sound like. It was soft, controlled, intimate, like she was singing directly into your ear instead of across a stadium. On the surface, the Carpenters were labeled easy listening or soft rock. But listen closely, and you hear something quietly revolutionary. Karen's phrasing, her timing, her ability to sit right in the center of a note without over-singing, that became a whole new template for how emotion could live inside a song. She didn't have to shout to break your heart. At a time when women in rock were often expected to be either the wild frontwoman or the flawless pop doll, Karen carved out something different, the powerful softness, the idea that vulnerability itself was a kind of strength. And generations of singers, from pop balladeers to indie artists, took notes. A whole wave of soft rock vocalists, male and female, learned that subtlety could be just as devastating as a scream. Karen Carpenter didn't just survive in a loud era. She proved there was room for a completely different kind of voice, and changed what rock and pop could sound like from the inside. If Ronnie brought danger, and Karen brought vulnerability, Aretha Franklin brought something else. Raw, unapologetic power. By the time most people heard her version of Respect, they assumed it was her song. But it started as a track written and recorded by Otis Redding, a man demanding respect from his partner. Aretha flipped the script. She rearranged the song, rephrased the lines, added that iconic RESPECT hook, and turned a man's request into a woman's demand. Suddenly, this wasn't just a song about a relationship. It was an anthem for civil rights, for women's rights, for anyone who felt walked over and unheard. In the late 60s, that was a radical act. To stand at the microphone, as a black woman in America, and say, "You will give me respect. You will spell it out. You will hear me." Musically, she fused gospel fire with soul grit and rock energy. Vocally, she took every tool the church gave her and aimed it straight at the mainstream charts. The result? She redrew the emotional map for what a soul or rock vocal could do, not just technically, but politically. From that moment forward, every time an artist stepped up and sang from a place of unapologetic power, male or female, they were walking a path Aretha had already burned into the ground. By the mid-70s, another shift was coming, this time from inside one of the biggest rock bands on the planet. Stevie Nicks didn't look or write like the traditional rock frontman. She brought shawls, mysticism, poetry, and a lyrical voice that sounded like a diary read aloud in the middle of a storm. Songs like Rhiannon, Dreams, and Landslide didn't just tell stories. They wove images, symbols, and emotions together in a way rock hadn't quite heard before. In a band filled with strong personalities and songwriters, Stevie's perspective gave rock something it desperately needed: a woman's point of view at the very center of the narrative. She sang about independence, heartbreak, self-doubt, and strength in a way that didn't copy the male storytelling style. She didn't try to outdo the dudes. She brought her own language, her own mythology, and fans, especially women, saw themselves in that. You can trace a line from Stevie Nicks straight through to generations of alternative pop and rock artists who embraced being a little mystical, a little complicated, a little unpolished, and completely themselves. Stevie didn't just join a rock band. She helped redefine what a rock storyteller could look and sound like. 4 women, 4 different eras, 4 completely different sounds. Ronnie Spector brought danger into a tightly controlled pop world. Carpenter proved that softness could shake an entire decade. Aretha Franklin turned a simple song into a revolution. Stevie Nicks rewrote the job description for the rock frontperson. They didn't wait for permission to change rock and soul. They just did it. One voice, one song, one performance at a time. If you want more stories like this, more women who rewrote music history quietly, but completely, hit subscribe and stick around. This is just the beginning of the series. Who should we talk about next?